I would encourage the Trump administration to expose what went on to the degree they can get access to the records, or there are records to disclose, about how this pardon came about. Who wrote what? Who wrote this material? Who did it? First up is the corruption in the Biden White House. Unless you've been living under a rock, you now know that President Biden pardoned his son, Hunter Biden, on the two charges or two convictions, one of which he pled guilty to, the other which he was found guilty of, related to tax crimes and gun crimes. And on top of that, the pardon extended back 10 years for crimes known and unknown, the date to be just before he began his corrupt racketeering operation that everyone now knows, based on the information that's been made available through various investigations, including Judicial watches, that was designed to benefit Joe and the rest of the Biden crime family. And here was my first reaction video to the pardon scandal, explaining what some of the issues were. Hey everyone, I'm sure you've seen by now the big news of Joe Biden's terrible pardon of his son, Hunter. There's really been nothing like it in American history. The president pardoning a family member who frankly could testify against him and put him in jail. That's where we stand today as a result of Joe Biden's awful pardon. Really a fitting end in many ways to his career of corruption, whether it be in the Senate, through the vice presidency, now into the presidency. Joe Biden looks to have been running a RICO operation, and now he's abused his office further to grant an unwarranted pardon, a blanket pardon, to his son. Now, Judicial Watch has already been investigating and exposed so much of what we know about Biden's corruption, and now we've officially expanded the investigation to include this scandalous pardon. So we're up on it, right? And I issued a series of tweets, which was followed up by a general statement from Judicial Watch on the pardon. Let's bring up a few of those tweets, remind me what I said. It perfectly fits the Biden family's arc of corruption. It's all about protecting Joe. And as you clearly see, it helps ensure his son will be less likely to testify against him. And as I note in the tweet, there's a series of false allegations attached to the official pardon about Hunter's prosecution and how it was selective and corrupt. And frankly, the only selective prosecution involved here was the decision not to select Joe for prosecution, and frankly to limit Hunter's prosecutions to protect Joe from being implicated. And I joked at the end, and it's not really a joke, Joe is the most corrupt vice president since he was president. Think about that. And of course, Attorney General Garland's been, it's been crickets from him on this. Is he going to resign in protest and outrage now that Joe Biden has stated Garland's prosecution of Hunter Biden to be corrupt and selective? Are Biden's criticisms of DOJ employees as corrupt, dangerous? Or is that only true when Republicans, Trump, and conservatives criticize the Justice Department? We come back to me here. You remember when Garland had that awful press conference where he essentially threatened all Americans who were criticizing the Justice Department, saying critics of the Justice Department and the lawfare against Trump were engaged in dangerous behavior. So the President of the United States just does it, and where's Garland complaining about that? Remember, this pardon was done in a way as to prevent Hunter's sentencing. Typically pardons are done, and I'm not saying all pardons are done this way, but in the ordinary course, a pardon comes after sentencing or sometimes even after jailing. And so Biden quickly intervened so as to prevent his son from being sentenced and causing more political headaches for him. and, as I call it, the regime. And as I've noted, the kind of the broad nature of the pardon is sketchy. It's suspicious constitutionally. Typically, pardons are supposed to be specific as to the offense. You're being pardoned for such and such a crime. And it has to be, because it's a federal pardon, it has to be a federal offense. But Biden's language was so broad. I don't know, do we have the actual pardon language up? Can we bring up the pardon itself? There we go. For those offenses against the United States, which he has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 1st, 2014 through December 1st, 2024, including but not limited to all offenses charged or prosecuted, including any that may have resulted in convictions by the special counsel, etc. So that last part of the paragraph there, you can come back to me. That last part of the paragraph there, that's okay. What's not okay is the first part of the paragraph where he's talking about any and all offenses for a 10-year period. That's not normal, that's not right, that's not constitutional, and I don't think it can be enforced. Now, who could challenge something like that? Well, the prosecutors in the next administration that want to pursue charges going back that far. And it would be a novel question before the courts, because the only similar pardon to that, in terms of broadness, was the Nixon pardon from Ford's pardon of Nixon. And it was kind of similarly broad, but it was a little bit more specific in the sense you knew it was for, and I don't have the exact language in front of me, but it was broad for offenses from when he was president. Now, that was never challenged in court. But other than that pardon, every other pardon is specific. There's been nothing like this. And frankly, the Nixon pardon is the exception that proves the rule that they have to be specific. Now, Judicial Watch over the years has really done a lot of work on pardons, believe it or not. Back in the end of the Clinton administration, remember, he issued a series of controversial and scandalous pardons, including to a donor who had literally fled the country, Mark Rich. 140 pardons. And some of which were broad in nature, some of which hadn't even been delivered. So we tried to get those pardons clawed back, and a different interpretation of them in a way to make them invalid because they were so broad, seemingly on their faces in certain circumstances. But nothing like the Biden pardons. Nothing like the Biden pardon, excuse me. And when you look at the material from Joe's statement, this is what especially is corrupt. It's the series, as I note, the false statements in his attached to the pardon. The charges in this case, Hunter's, came only about after several of my political opponents in Congress instigated them to attack me and oppose my election. Now, the charges were under investigation for 5 years, and they were suppressed by your Justice Department, Joe. False. Then a carefully negotiated plea deal agreed to by the Department of Justice unraveled in the courtroom, with a number of my political opponents in Congress taking credit for bringing political pressure on the process. False. They became unraveled because whistleblowers exposed the scam that they were, and a federal judge asked, why do you have this extraordinary broad immunity agreement? Has there ever been anything like this in a plea agreement? And the Justice Department said no. And they had to retreat a bit, and Hunter said, if I'm not going to get this sweetheart deal, I'm out. So another false statement by President Biden. No reasonable person who looks at the facts of Hunter's cases can reach any other conclusion than Hunter was singled out only because he's my son, and that is wrong. No, he was protected. These crimes are only a subset of the greater crimes he was involved in. They purposely waited for key tax violations, the statute of limitations to pass. They didn't investigate the FARA cases, or they didn't prosecute the FARA issue, which is the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which was used like a cudgel for the first time in history against Trump's people. They didn't apply it to Hunter, even though it was clearly he was working on behalf of foreign agents, foreign governments, which of course would again implicate Joe. So falsehood after falsehood. And of course, I guess everyone's offended by this. I'm used to politicians lying, so it's outrageous, but it's actually par for the course here in D.C. But Joe really went out on a limb here, and his spokesman, in denying he would ever pardon Hunter. And I did a watch video of a compilation of all of his statements saying he'd never pardon him. Let's go.
Let me ask
They've
you,
been lying
will
to
you
you.
accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
Is there any possibility that the president would end up pardoning his son?
No.
Well, is there?
I just said no. I just answered. Go ahead.
Would the president pardon or commute his son if he's convicted?
So I've answered this question before. It was asked of me not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, and I was very clear, and I said no.
And I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I abide by the jury decision, and I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
First briefing since Hunter was indicted again in Los Angeles. Why doesn't President Biden just pardon him?
The president, I've been very clear. The president's not going to pardon his son.
And one more about the...
You've also said several times that the president would not pardon or commute the sentences for his son, Hunter. I just want to make sure that that is not going to change over the next 6 months. The president's saying he would not...
It's still a no. It's still a no.
It will always be a no.
It's still a no. It will be a no. It is a no, and I don't have anything else to add. Will he pardon his son? No.
His son, Hunter, is also up for being sentenced next month. Does the president have any intention of pardoning him?
We've been asked that question multiple times. Our answer stands, which is no.
Isn't that awful? Even the Democrats are offended by this. And what makes it really pernicious or malicious or outrageous, pick your description, your adjective, unpack your adjective, is that the reports are that as they were saying he was never going to pardon him, they were internally talking about pardoning him. So it wasn't like I changed my mind. No, they were planning on it for months. And when you look at this material, I'm sorry, it looks like it was written by Hunter's lawyers. They controlled the writing of it. It's clear. So I've compared it to a will that sometimes is signed by someone not of sound mind, right? And people come in and contest the will, saying, you know, Grandpa Joe was not of sound mind. I contest, you know, Hunter getting all the money in this case, right? I don't think this pardon was signed by a man of sound mind. Now, is that enough to challenge its legality? Probably not, but I'm going to make that point. And I'd be interested in finding out more, and I would encourage the Trump administration to expose what went on to the degree they can get access to the records, or there are records to disclose, about how this pardon came about. Who wrote what? Who wrote this material? Who did it? And people have asked me, well, are there going to be other pardons of Joe's family? And I'm like, well, it depends. Are they going to come up here and write it for him? If so, yeah, probably. I mean, he's not competent. And I don't mean that in the he can't do his job well sense. I mean in the mental sense. At least that's my view. And now there are stories from Politico and the Washington Post that Biden is considering another set of unprecedented, I would argue, unlawful pardons to preempt possible prosecutions by the Trump administration for misconduct of people like Schiff, Mark Milley. Who else was on the list? Fauci, Jack Smith, that whole gang who was engaged in lawfare against Trump. That's never been done before, if it happens. I don't think it would be lawful, and if the Trump administration should just go ahead and try to challenge it in court if they try to do it. I mean, Mark Milley is going to be protected from potential court-martial for treasonous subversion, because that's what he should be prosecuted for or investigated for. Fauci, the gain of function fraud, he's going to get a pass on that. Jack Smith, that whole gang, they can do whatever they want. They get a pass. Why doesn't Joe just write a pardon for everyone who worked in his administration? Under that theory of the law, that's what he can do. And it suggests that maybe that theory of the law is incorrect, right? And if that's going to be the precedent, Trump and every future president can come in and basically pardon everybody for anything they do wrong in his administration from being prosecuted ever. And that's not the way pardons are supposed to work typically, right? So Judicial Watch, as I said, we are investigating this issue, and we're going to, we've already been on top of the Biden scandals specifically, but now we're going to expand to include a new scandal, which is the Biden pardon scandal. Now, on top of that, as I was saying earlier on, we've got this tremendous work in investigating pardons. We had this case back with the Clinton era pardons, and this is just so typical Republican, right? So Clinton throws out 140 pardons basically the night he's leaving office. And he left it literally for President Bush to implement the pardons, which Bush didn't have to do, but he did it anyway. So it was that loser approach. And then on top of that, when we asked for records from the Office of Pardon Attorney for the handling of those pardons, the Bush people asserted executive privilege, even though the records weren't executive privilege documents. They were internal documents at the Justice Department. And we got the appellate court to say no, and it was a big ruling here in the D.C. Circuit, that the executive privilege is overruled. So it was a major victory. You know what the Bush people did? They gave us the 945 pages of what they had on Clinton's corrupt pardons, and they blacked them all out using another privilege, deliberative process privilege, one that we couldn't really overcome. So there you had the Republicans covering up for the Democrats. And so I hope it's going to be different under the Trump administration, because this is a scandal that needs to be investigated and exposed by President Trump. Now, can Biden be prosecuted for this? No. No, he can't. Not under the Supreme Court precedent related to immunity and the Constitution, frankly. It's the type of thing he can do as president, and it's not subject to second guessing by the courts of Congress. But let me be clear here. The fact that Joe Biden pardoned Hunter does not mean that Joe Biden gets a get-out-of-jail-free card, nor should it mean. It doesn't mean Hunter gets a get-out-of-jail-free card, because I think the pardon is deficient, and it may not even cover everything that Joe thinks it covers, certainly at the state level. And what about other Biden family members? So unless the pardon scheme and scam widens, including a self-pardon for Joe, and some have suggested that's not appropriate, it probably is, but the courts might fight that out too. So this ain't over, folks. I mean, Joe has another month and a half, what's today? The 5th, 6th? Is it Pearl Harbor Day? No, it's the 6th, right? Saturday's Pearl Harbor Day. So he's another 5 or 6 weeks to continue the corruption. But of course, this is perfectly in sync with what Biden's done, right? As I said, it's completed his arc of corruption, where he's repeatedly misused the powers of his office and abused the powers of his office to protect himself and line his own pockets. And one way you kind of put the bow on it, right, is to pardon those who helped you do it, including Hunter. And what a mockery of the rule of law this is.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.